friends of friends. It started off with me sort of family from my church. It's very something more not. But it's quite fun because like you move to different churches and you see them once a year. Definitely don't get that. Trying to get we had to move those sofas from like 20-minute walk away this morning. Even Carlos house and it's their green. It was looking like this walking down campus. There was 8 of us, there was 7. So once I always had 3 and it was always so we made it, and only one leg not doing it. How was it really drag especially lost Harley was on number 4 though. Hopefully it was good. But that was one that was right. That's what they'll tell their land. Yeah. Oh, you don't have 3 legs. Yeah, especially popping up with the Bible, supported by the gospel. Clearly, that was not the move. It's making lots of copies on the couple.
Hi everyone, just to say that if you would like a hot drink or a piece of cake, then they are just over there to my left or right. Help yourself, and we will probably start in about 15 minutes or so. So grab yourself that and sit back down. Thank you very much.
I miss you so much, Joel Owen.
the presentation happening here or it's here? Okay.
Yeah, now so I got a postdoc position in Paris. I was staying in Paris for the next 3 years. So we're looking to relocate with my boyfriend. We were actually discussing this right now.
I did how.
Near the Chinese border. Because we like the restaurants and we like the food.
Hello and welcome to this afternoon's event. If you would like to grab a seat, that would be fantastic. But also, if you want another drink or a bit of cake at any point, just go and help yourself. So welcome to today's event, which is Big Questions of Academic Life, a Christian Perspective. So we're here to think about some of the big questions of academia that maybe we don't get a lot of chance to chat about day to day, but actually shape quite a lot of why and how we work. Thank you all for coming along. It's great to see you here. Some very quick bits of housekeeping. We very much are not hoping or expecting a fire, but if there is a fire, there's multiple exits signposted with the green. If you leave out of this one, the refuge point is routes. If you head out of, there's an accessibility door, and the refuge point is the Chancellor's Bar, nice. And then the refuge point for anywhere else is the piazza. But the most important thing, just leave. Leave if there's a fire. There might be photography happening as well. If you do not want to be in any photographs, there are some orange lanyards at the back which you can put on, and you will not be in any photos. So we're going to start off today with 10 minutes of discussion on a first question. The plan for today is to do 10 minutes of discussion with then a short talk a couple of times through. And hopefully that will give us a chance to look at lots of different topics and just have a chat amongst ourselves. So the first thing we're going to be thinking of is, does who you are, so how does your identity affect how you approach your subjects? Have a think. There should be at least one person on your table who has also got a couple of the questions in front, but there's also there. So 10 minutes now, and we'll come back and hear our first talk very shortly.
Oh yeah, I think it's over here, yeah.
sorry to bring your discussions to a close there, but I hope that was interesting. And I think it's, I don't know, something we were talking about, we don't always think about, how does who we are approach our subject affect our approach, but actually it probably does more than we realise. So next up, we're going to hear from David about how, for him, being a Christian affects his work. So if I could ask David to come up, and if you would introduce yourself, and then he's going to talk.
Thank you. I'm David Lyons. I'm a professor in Italian studies in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures, and I'm a historian by training, an intellectual historian, but I tell people I'm not always very intellectual. As a historian and a practicing Christian, I'm sometimes drawn in two different directions. My instincts as a historian are to study the past in all of its detail, asking not only the fundamental question about what happened, but the more interesting questions about cause and significance. Why did what happened happen? What long-term effects did it have? In some sense, most historians' questions, even when we were specialists in times long gone, and I'm a Renaissance specialist, so 500 years ago, wow, are rooted in the desire to understand how the present came to be, what forces lie behind the moment in which we live. Christianity is, on one level, exactly this. We believe in a historic figure, Jesus, who walked the earth some 2,000 years ago, died for us, and came back to life, securing our redemption from sin and its penalty. If we think about history in terms of significance, nothing can equal this. Indeed, in the West, we still measure our historical timeline by events that took place before or after the coming of Christ, the Messiah. The Apostle Paul stressed the importance of these events and of the resurrection in particular by telling Christians living in the Greek city of Corinth that if the resurrection of Jesus was not a true fact, then we are in deep trouble. If Christ was not raised, then we will not be raised. If we will not be raised, we are the most miserable among living creatures, for our faith is for this life only. We might as well, Paul says, live for the present. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we'll die, he says. And after that, there is nothing in this viewpoint. Yet if on one level Christianity is a historic faith based on following a real teacher from the past who was God himself, on the more personal level, I find that the past can be tricky. Paul talked about this to believers in another Greek city, Philippi, where Alexander the Great came from. In his letter, Paul told them about his background. He had grown up in a God-fearing Jewish family, had kept the law of Moses zealously, even becoming a member of one of the most stringent religious sects of the time, the Pharisees. He was, as far as was possible, blameless in his observance of the law. He was recognized by his peers as being a God-fearing man, so much so that he persecuted believers in Christ because they seemed to deviate from the Jewish faith. Yet all of these things that he had been proud of, Paul says, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, he says that forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal of the upward calling of Christ, of God in Christ Jesus. In other words, for Paul, the call to follow Christ involved forgetting about his past, and especially all the things that he might have been proud of, rather than hanging on to it. It meant living not for the present, but in the present, and in the hope of one day seeing Jesus face to face. For others of us who may not have lived lives of which we can be especially proud, as Paul was, the invitation is the same, to forget about our past, in this case, with its sin and self-centered way of life. Its guilt and regrets no longer have a hold on us. Instead, we can live lives that seek to please Jesus rather than ourselves. We become freed from the power of past sin as we become creatures of the present, full of hope for the future. Too often, I think we look at the past in an almost talismanic way, as if it had a magical hold on the present. One of the programs I enjoy on television is football's Match of the Day. How often have you heard sports commentators say things such as, Tottenham Hotspurs have lost 12 of their past 13 games at Anfield, as if that somehow provided a template for the game they're presently covering? The really liberating thing about Christianity is that even though the past is important and worthwhile studying, and even though certain extraordinary events such as the resurrection really do change the course of history, in many other ways, we are not slaves to the past. We all know that history is full of examples of despicable human behavior. Greed, oppression, slavery, racism, colonialism, self-centeredness, and we could go on and on. We can get so wrapped up in all of this that we forget that in Christ we have redemption from all of it, a reason to live in the present with a hope for the future. So as an academic, I'm thrilled to try to study and understand the past. But as a Christian, I don't wallow in it, trapped as in a marshland, nor do I look to the past as a cabinet of trophies. Rather, I live in a present that is illuminated by faith, hope, and love. Indeed, by the character of a loving God who calls me to follow in his ways and become more like him. That seems to me to be a life worth living. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much, David. And I'm sure if you have any questions about that or want to chat to him at the end, he'd be happy to chat to you. So we're going to move on now to our next discussion, which is thinking about what makes work and study feel meaningful. So David talked a little bit about that there, but for us here at Warwick, why do we do what we do? What makes work and study feel meaningful? And we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to wrap up. Sorry to break into your discussions there. We've had a little bit of think about maybe kind of individually how we find purpose in our work. But Andy is going to come up now and talk to us a little bit about the wider kind of purpose of academia. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and then...
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So wonderful to see you. So, yeah, my name is Andy Wang. I'm an associate professor in the stats department. And, yeah, we're very briefly now going to think a bit about this huge question, what is the purpose of academia? And, well, the university as a goal has kind of two aims. So it's got kind of research and teaching. I'm going to focus on thinking about research in these kind of brief 10 minutes we have now. And before I dive into my current understanding of the purpose of academia, I thought it would be helpful to share kind of how I personally encountered this question, not just as a kind of interesting philosophical question, but as a real reality, like what are we doing here? Like, I know there's many PhD students and researchers here. For me personally, I kind of fell into my PhD. I didn't have some grandiose plan where I wanted to become a professor or change the world. For me, you know, I did maths. I was in Cambridge. I loved doing maths, and I was pretty good at it. You know, I had some work experience, and I thought that was just extremely boring. And so I thought to kind of avoid that, well, the obvious thing to do is to do a PhD. And so I found myself in a PhD and realized, okay, I've signed up now to do research. I'm part of academia. What exactly am I supposed to do now that I'm here? What is the point of this? And I remember very early on in my kind of PhD journey, there were various answers to that question presented to me, which I found really quite dissatisfying. I remember early on during my first year, I was in a kind of generic training type course, and one answer to this question, what is the purpose of academia, that was presented to me was this idea that the purpose of academia is to make a name for yourself, to build a personal brand and to, yeah, somehow be famous in a sense. And I thought to myself, well, that's well and good, but that also doesn't feel right, because if you just want to be famous or make a name for yourself, there are many ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be the hard graft of a PhD. So that didn't sit so well with me. Another kind of answer to this question that I came across, I think through a book I was reading, was saying kind of, well, the purpose of research is to produce, say, papers, articles, and somehow, you know, a really good piece of research, a good paper, is one that goes on to produce more research, to produce more papers. And again, that didn't quite sit well with me, because I thought that's kind of circular. If the purpose of papers is to produce more papers, you still haven't told me what they're for, what they're about. That's just, yeah, just going around. And so these are some of the answers that presented themselves to me, and none of them really sat well with me at all. And so over time, I started thinking about this more deeply, and being part of a church as a Christian, I eventually, now my current understanding is to see, well, actually, the goal actually of all of life, in many ways, is to glorify God. And specifically, in this talk, I want to focus on what the ancients called the three transcendentals. So that's truth, goodness, and beauty. And I see actually our goal as researchers is actually the pursuit of those things in our specific context of academia, within our specific disciplines within research. And so maybe I'll just spend a bit of time thinking about each of those and sharing a bit how, in my own research in maths and statistics, how those kind of play out. And hopefully in your own discussions or in your own time, you can think what those might look like for you in your own disciplines. So let me start perhaps with truth. So truth is a huge topic, but I guess fortunately in a sense in mathematics, there is a pretty good, well agreed upon notion of what truth is. So for the ancients, truth is that which is meant to appeal to your intellect. Your intellect is somehow meant to conform to truth or seek after it. And certainly of the three transcendentals within the academy, I would say among the three, truth is the most important one. That is, of the three, for us, the highest one somehow. And certainly within mathematics, for my research, it's quite clear what that looks like. A theorem is kind of true, it's correct, if your conclusions really do follow from your hypotheses. You have a proof that is coherent, there's no gaps, there's no mistakes. So at least within mathematics, it's fairly straightforward to talk about truth. The other two, I think, for me personally, are maybe not so clear-cut. So, for example, something like goodness. So goodness is supposed to appeal to the will. It's meant to draw your will is supposed to be drawn to goodness. And as I was meditating on this one, I think for me, actually, goodness within statistics and mathematics might actually be less about the actual output in terms of the papers, the articles you write, but actually more perhaps about your heart posture as you are doing the research. Certainly within statistics, you know, there are many ways in which you could be unscrupulous, let's say. Because if you have a conclusion you really want to push and you have a given data set, there are ways in which you could do this in a not so good way. And so certainly when I think about what it looks like for me when I'm writing my papers or thinking about these kinds of things, I sense, is my attitude toward this correct? Certainly as a Christian, ultimately I see I'm trying to glorify God, and it's not about me. And I sense that posture is arguably even more important than the specific theorems or proofs that I'm writing. So that's a little bit about goodness. And what about beauty? So actually, I've spoken at length. I gave a whole talk about beauty and maths, so please come and ask me about that. So I won't rehash that whole talk now. But actually, I think on a personal level, I think the experience of beauty, I hope for all of us, is actually the most important. Because beauty is meant to appeal to the heart. It's not about your intellect. It's not so much about your will. It appeals to you on an even deeper level, which is your heart. And so maybe I should say a few words. What do I mean by beauty? And because certainly in different disciplines, it's going to look completely different. And I would argue that beauty as a property, I would say it is that which instills in you a sense of wonder and awe. And so hopefully you can all relate to that, regardless of your specific field and your specific discipline. For example, it's the same way in which a piece of music can be beautiful because you sense it touches you in some profound way. Or architecture can be beautiful because when you see it, just for a moment you forget yourself. And I hope, if you're doing research, at some point you would have experienced that feeling of wonder and awe during your own research. Hopefully at some point, otherwise presumably you wouldn't pursue your particular subject. And certainly in the context of mathematics, we were discussing this at the table, I think it really is this sense that when you prove something well and you have an elegant proof, it speaks to you in a non-rational way. You read this theorem or this proof, and instinctively you feel, this is right. And certainly as a Christian, I would say that those moments are when God is breaking in to your day-to-day experience. So I have no idea how long I've been talking for. Maybe I'll wrap up and summarize. So in this very brief talk, I've tried to argue that the pursuit of these transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, those should be the motivation behind academia. And among them, perhaps truth is the most important. But I've also tried to argue that on a day-to-day basis, I would argue that beauty is really, really important. Because that is the thing that draws you out of yourself. It's when, I would argue as a Christian, you can encounter God in the day-to-day. And for those of you who are doing research and perhaps have the freedom to somewhat dictate what you're working on, I'd really recommend or humbly submit to you, follow that. Like when in your research do you experience awe and beauty, and pursue that. You may find you end up going off the beaten track and not doing what everyone else is doing. In my own experience, I've started getting really interested in a branch of maths called category theory, which is quite far removed from statistics traditionally understood, but I found it to be immensely rewarding and beautiful, and who knows, it might turn out to be a big deal. I don't know yet. But certainly I've absolutely adored this exploration and discovery I've been on. Maybe I'll just also end with just some brief comments about how, as I've thought about this, how it's actually changed me as a person. Certainly going out of my undergraduate, I was doing maths, I was at Cambridge, I was quite bright. I had this extremely tunnel vision view, basically of all other disciplines that weren't maths. I genuinely believed that maths was the only truth, and that everything else was basically second rate. Physicists I could tolerate, computer scientists maybe, humanities, no, beyond the pale. And of course now I look back on myself and I laugh because I think just how tunnel visioned and self-absorbed I was. Because now, as I've been arguing, truth, goodness, and beauty, well, really these are the domain of the humanities, really. At least traditionally speaking, the humanities are trying to articulate how the people who, our ancestors, how previous generations have articulated and understood these questions. And so despite the fact that I'm still a mathematician, I still love mathematics and statistics, I think actually really the humanities are the core of the university. So that's something I had to eat some humble pie and realize I was wrong as an undergraduate. And so certainly ever since I was dwelling more on these issues, I've come to have a much greater appreciation, let's say, of kind of the wider university rather than just my own kind of tunnel vision view. So let me just wrap up by saying, yes, truth, goodness, and beauty. I think these are all things we should just dwell on generally. And certainly as a Christian, I believe that God is the source of all of those. And certainly in terms of seeking beauty and awe, which I recommend you do, I humbly submit that that is your encounter of God. And if you pull on that, I think hopefully you will find him in some way, shape, or form. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. So for our final discussion, we just want to have a bit of a general discussion on what's one thought, question, or challenge you're taking away from today. Maybe there's something that you thought, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to think about maybe how that changes how I think about my work. Maybe it's something you went, well, I don't agree with that. Tell the person next to you on your table, discuss it. And if you have any more kind of leftover questions from other discussion sessions, or you want to argue why you maybe disagree with Andy's purpose of academia, talk to him, or whether you agree. So just going to spend a few minutes kind of having a think about some of these topics, and then I will round us off in about 10 minutes. Sorry to once again interrupt your discussions, but I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's given you some things to think about anyway. I will kind of formally wrap it up here, but please do stay and chat and discuss more if you're interested. So just to say, firstly, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the Christian Union for letting us have this slot in their events week, which is good news. So just say this event has been run by the Christian Postgraduate and Staff Network at Warwick, sometimes known as CPS Network at Warwick. Just say a little bit about who we are. We're a group of postgrads and staff that meet up firstly because we want to share what we think is really good news of the Christian faith to the postgrads and staff that are at Warwick. And secondly, we want to think about how does Christian faith interact with each of our subjects and the actual work that we do, and also to encourage one another. There's ups and downs in academic life all the time, and we're kind of there to support one another. If you're interested in finding out a bit more about who we are or what we do, please stay in touch. There's also on your tables should be one of these little programs on with a bit more about what's coming up for us. We every other week tend to have something on, a Bible study. We also have kind of prayer meetings and kind of more social lunches. There's also a QR code there if you want to join our WhatsApp group, which is just where some bit more information and updates. But we've also got a website which is on the corner of the screens, which is cpsnetwork.org. But one thing I want to particularly point out is that apologies, I've broken the slides. Could we go back onto the QR codes? Yeah, thank you. So coming up on the 10th of March, we've got a really exciting talk by Professor Jane Hutton, who's a professor of statistics here at Warwick, who does great work with stats and also has an interest in research ethics and is a Christian. And so she's going to give a talk about research ethics and the Christian faith, her experience and some examples from some of that. So if you want to hear a bit more about how Christian faith interacts with work, and particularly how and why we do work through research ethics, I'd really encourage you to come along to that. The two QR codes are calendar invites. So if you want to get this in your calendar early and make sure it's there, depending on whether you're a Google or an Apple user, there's a couple of different options there. But scan that, add that in your calendar. There'll be some more information coming about that soon. But, I mean, that's the main things. Date, time, room to take note of. As part of Senior Events Week, there is a bookstore in the back corner. If you're interested, go and have a look at some of the books there. They cover all sorts of things on the Christian faith. They are all free to take away, so please do look. And if something is of interest, then please take it. If you are interested in finding out a bit more about the Christian faith, and one of the best ways of doing that is by reading the Bible, which Christians believe is God's word and tells us all that we need to know about that. Please, again, let one of us know, or grab a Bible from the bookstore. One final thing, we'd love to get some feedback from the event as part of Senior Events Week. So again, there's going to be a QR code up. It's very short, just one line of what you thought. And if you want to leave your contact details, you can do. You do not have to. You can just leave your feedback and move on from there. Thank you all very much for coming. Please feel free to stick around, grab another drink, grab some more cake. And there's no kind of rush to leave, but we'll end it there. Thank you very much.